It's eclipse season, y'all. We are entering into eclipse season as we go into September, and we're kicking it off with a lunar eclipse and a full moon in Pisces on the 7th, and right before that, Uranus goes retrograde in Gemini until the end of the year. So this is a time of change and also a time of chaos, while at the same time being a time of review, because Uranus is the third of the three outer planets to have gone retrograde this season. So as the all outer planets have changed signs, therefore changing modalities, we are being asked to review this initial change. So what have we learned as a society? What have we actually become to believe about our societies, right? And how is that then informing the ways in which we move forward as collectives? This is the weekly forecast for the week of September 3rd through the 9th, what I am calling the Great Lock-In. So what are we locking into? So let's get into it, y'all. So welcome back to Yapping with the Stars, a show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, and a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. Now, I am your host and guide, Dr. Nicole Rouse. I'm a storyteller who comes from a line of storytellers who weaves and tells stories in many different ways. And here I work with astrology and ethnography to explore the stories of what it means for us to be human. Because right now the present is up for grabs. So who is leading the stories that will bring us into our futures? Now, every Wednesday we check into the chaos we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, or reflect upon? All right. So let's get into it, y'all. I want to talk about this eclipse season, okay? And I really want to talk about what an eclipse is, what this means in the access of Virgo and Pisces, and how this happening right after Uranus goes retrograde is really a needed time of not just reflection and review, but also a time in which we have to understand that if change is knocking at the door, then the only way that we can work with this change is if we direct it. So what does that really mean to do so? Well, in order to figure out where you're going, you got to figure out where you came from. So now that the outer planets have all changed signs and they're in retrograde, Neptune and Uranus in particular are saying, okay, but let's review where we came from though. Pluto did this review last year when we went from Capricorn to Aquarius, back into Capricorn before we went to the Aquarius again, right? So now we're fully in Aquarius. Now we're fully in change, transformation, the collective, okay? So the collective needs to die in order to be reborn. I've been talking about this a lot. And really, death is knocking at the door because we're going into fall season. We're going into the time in which we are in harvest. So what are we harvesting, y'all? What are you harvesting and why? And I think that's a really important question, because if we also work with the seasons alongside what the cosmos is saying, we get a lot more depth in what we can kind of do to navigate these shaky terrains. So we are harvesting things that were planted previously. And since we are having a full moon, in Pisces, September 7th, we got to ask ourselves, what did the last full moon in Pisces reveal to us? And that last full moon was last September. That was also a lunar eclipse. It was a partial lunar eclipse, but it was opening up this story about what our kind of Virgo-Pisces conversation is going to be this eclipse season. Because eclipses occur when we get a new or full moon near the lunar nodes. And since the lunar nodes are in Pisces and Virgo, we're in this kind of Pisces-Virgo season of engaging in service and understandings of service, of care, of health, and how that impacts collectives, the collectives we're a part of and the collectives in society overall. And so with these outer planets, right, changing signs and these kind of eclipses happening in the axis, again, of health and of service, there is a way that we're being asked to reevaluate our definitions of those things. All right. What do we mean by service, y'all? What do we mean by health? Do we even know what those things truly look, feel, taste, smell like? Can we embody it? Because right now, if we're being honest with ourselves, the collective is really sick. We are sick as a society because we don't believe a goddamn thing. We don't believe ourselves. We don't believe one another. We don't believe our realities. Instead, we have allowed the structure's analysis of our realities to be the veil that completely kind of shifts the ways in which we understand ourselves and one another. Now, when I say that, I'm not trying to make it saying every single person. I'm saying as a general feel of it, right? Collectively, we are sick. And so we're trying to figure out what does it mean to get well. And for me, the South Node being in Virgo, the North Node being being in Pisces is telling us one way we can start to get well again is if we release our understandings of care that we have been taught from these structures. Because do they actually work? Do they actually work? See, Virgo is the sign. I've talked about this a couple of episodes ago, y'all. Virgo is the sign, right, of the Virgin. It's the sign of service, the sign of health. And how, though, we have constructed all of those things has been very much through a patriarchal lens. And that is really being interrogated. And that's been interrogating. Patriarchy's been on the table for interrogation, honestly, really since Venus was in Aries a while ago. That opened up the conversation around how we understand gender and relationships and sex and justice and the like, alongside Mars. When Mars was in Cancer for that long time, then what do we go to war for? How do we care? What do we understand to be nurturing and empathy and mothering, right? And what happens if we take that and go and take that seriously, actually go to war for it, right? What do we go to war for? When Venus and Mars were in each other's signs, which means that those planets were so-called in quote unquote detriment or fall, right? That was the beginning conversation of having us ask ourselves, is it really in fall, or do we need to rethink these foundational understandings of society, which then goes to ideas of care, nurturing, relationships, justice, and money, the things overall that Mars and Venus rules, along with strategy, right? So what are the strategies that we're deploying to understand what our needs are, what needs we have? And so then when Jupiter went into Cancer, right? I talked about this a couple of weeks ago as well. When Jupiter went into Cancer at the beginning, or at the end, excuse me, of May, it made an immediate square to Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So we are being asked to reevaluate and bend our understandings of family, of how we understand family nurturing and care is making itself abundantly clear. So we've been asked to be in this kind of reflection and review for a while because the cosmos themselves have, I think, purposely been bending and twisting the ways that we understand these placements and how they express themselves. Does it still make sense in the modern day? So with the outer planets, again, all in this conversation, you have Neptune in Aries right now, retrograde, Pluto in Aquarius, retrograde, Uranus direct, but it will be going retrograde September 6th. We are now being asked to reflect and review upon our knowledge and knowing, right? The genius of us, Gemini, right? The ways in which our brains have been constructed by structures and what we need to do to reimagine that. We're being asked to then reimagine our understanding of the collective, right? Pluto and Aquarius, and what it means for us to collectivize around certain knowledges. And then we're being asked to understand then the stories, right? The foundational understandings of these structures and where that power lies. And what happens when we take that power back, take the story back. And because Saturn, the planet of discipline, of boundaries, of time, of culture, of tradition, right? Who I call the crone, the one who understands what it takes to be human. There's a responsibility to your life. There's a responsibility to living. Saturn is saying we have the responsibility to remake that story because the stories are what set the foundations of society that then and they are informed by the ways in which we understand and construct that knowledge, construct that logic, construct that analysis, right? It's the knowing, the knowledge production of a society. Now, why am I saying all of this and why am I opening up the show like this? Because I want us to see the story unfolding, y'all. I can do the breakdown and I will later for the Patreon of each of the of each day, okay? But I want to see the overall story for folks to really grapple with. What is the story that has been unfolding for you in the houses that the outer planets are now sitting in for you? So you're going to look at the house that Aries rules along with Pisces because of the retrograde. You're going to look at the house that Gemini rules along with Taurus because of the retrograde of Uranus. And then you're going to look at the house of Aquarius. What is the story that's been unfolding for you in those houses? And what has change been telling you needs to happen for you and with those houses and what those houses represent? So for me, Scorpio risings, y'all. Scorpio risings. 8th house, Gemini. 6th house, Aries. And then 4th house, Aquarius, right? There is a conversation that I'm having very loudly about what is home, what is work, and who do I share resources with? Because what I consider and who I consider home, right? Who are my people are the ones who I do want to work with. I can't work with just anybody. That's something I've had to learn the hard way. Aries rules my sixth house. The sixth house is the house of labor, the house of capital, right? The house of the things we have to do every day to maintain our life. And it's also the house of small pets and open enemies, right? To name a few, right? And in Aries, with being a Scorpio rising, with Mars ruling my ninth house, there is a way that I have had nothing but battles, right? Literally had to go to war in institutions, particularly of higher ed or also religious ones, around my own head and my own thoughts and having ideas taken, right? Or having to defend myself. And there is a way that that was exhausting. Like if I believe my body, right, by believing my knowing, then I realize that is not how I want to operate. So there is a way that the outer planets are really asking me to reevaluate then, okay, so then what is home and foundations and roots? Who are your people? Right? Because that is going to help me and ground me and give me the protection I need to be able to go back into war, the sixth house of Aries, to be able to go back and be able to have a more sustainable understanding of work and capital and labor. Because at the end of the day, if I don't have a body, I can't do a goddamn thing, which then means that will impact who I choose to share resources with. Right. So there's a lot of change happening for me in that kind of half of my chart that is asking me to have to reevaluate then the stories I've told myself about where I come from, what kind of work I do, how I show up, the idea of resources and how I lead in that. Because for a very long time, I was taught and trained, right, from family, fourth house, that my worth and my value was tied to my work, sixth house, which meant and that basic and not only was it tied to that work, it was tied to me doing it. Right. It was tied to me being the one in charge and leading and, not needing to ask for help because folks ain't going to help me anyway. So I just got to do it my damn self. And so I'm taking the burden on of everything so that when I'm thinking about sharing resources, all I know how to do is give. I don't actually know how to receive. That burnt me out, y'all. That completely burnt me out. And so in these kind of outer planet conversations, right, that reconfiguration is having a very loud story that is asking me to rewrite. So then I had to ask myself, okay, what if I rewrite the story? Then what is the story I'm rewriting? The story goes to Neptune and Saturn. So since Neptune is and Saturn are in my sixth house going into my fifth, I'm having to reevaluate and rewrite the story of my understanding of my value and worth via capital, via my work, via my health and how that has been impacted, right? Where in childhood did I learn those things? Fifth house. The fifth house is childhood, childlike things, pleasure, sex, um, owning your own business, right? To name a few, hobbies and the like. And there is a way that I have to go back in and essentially do a reparenting. So if you're a Scorpio rising and you are getting quote unquote kind of childhood triggers, or there's these types of kind of reemergings of past understandings of self that keep coming up in the present, this is an invitation to realize that we can reparent ourselves by retelling ourselves these stories that were foundational to who we thought we were and how that then impacted how we showed up in the world, right? If we take that authority back, again, Saturn and Aries, and the authority being how we construct our mythos, our understanding, right, of who we are and how we operate in the world by going back into and doing those kind of reparenting by embodying your childhood, right? So this is pleasure, this is play, this is crafting, this is figuring out what your hobbies are, right? Play actually has a purpose right now. And that's what a lot of Scorpio risers are realizing. If we don't actually engage with our play, engage with our pleasure as a way to understand more about ourselves, then once Saturn and Neptune go back into Aries, it's going to be a battle, right? Really of the head. It's going to be a battle of who owns the head, which means inflammation will be there. And inflaming of the body, because again, the sixth house is the house of health as well. And since Aries is fire ruled by Mars, this is inflammation. So I'm giving myself as the example so that if you look at your chart, y'all, I want you to be able to tell stories, your own stories, by working with your chart. Okay. I do teach this in my Patreon. If you're interested at the soundscape level and higher, we've already gone through a number of exercises over the last few months in which I've been helping people learn how to work with their chart to tell their own stories. So I did an overall kind of view of planet, stars, and zodiacs, and then we broke that down into different planets and told the story of the planets and then put different planets in a conversation. So we're finishing up that series this month, finishing up with Neptune and Pluto, and then we're going to do a kind of overall arching story based upon current transit. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the Patreon, y'all. Okay. But let's get into the actual week. Okay. So that sets the stage, what I just talked about, this kind of story that's unfolding in the cosmos, and how we are being called to understand that if change and chaos are here, and eclipses are about eclipsing power, right? This is unstable energy, and we are already living in unstable times because Uranus and Taurus made it very clear just how unstable a lot of these structures are, right? Then there is a certain kind of awakening we are being asked to do by going into our shadows. Again, eclipses are about shadow and light, right? They're about the night and dark. They're about the conscious, unconscious, the kind of things we can see versus the things we cannot. So what are the things hiding in the dark that we don't want to exactly look at but need to at this time? So there is this quote unquote awakening happening, but it's an awakening happening in our bodies and our understandings then of how those bodies do have a spirit, and that spirit is what connects us to other people. So this is Virgo and Pisces, okay? So we really are getting into this kind of conversation between health, our physical health, and our collective health. And again, we are a sick society. We don't believe. Right? We don't believe ourselves and our realities because we've been taught not to believe our bodies. We have been taught that the mind is somehow can discipline the body. Right? We have been taught that the mind is kind of, quite frankly, more important than the body. So if the mind says you can do it, it doesn't matter what the body says. Mind over matter. But how has it actually worked? And is it true? Right? Has that understanding of care and health, especially of the body, and therefore how we then care for our bodies and one another's bodies, has that provided us the healthy societies that we're purported to do if we just disciplined ourselves some more, right? How many of y'all, I think I might have mentioned this before, but how many of y'all back in the early 2000s watched Biggest Loser or any of those kind of weight loss shows, right? There's a Biggest Loser documentary out right now on Netflix. And when I was watching that documentary, again, forgive me if I forget if I talked about this last week or not. But if I was watching that documentary, it brought up a lot of memories for me in that early 2000s of just how much we were all taught to really hate our bodies, right? We were really taught to hate our bodies and that it could always be thinner. It could always be tighter. It could always be leaner. So there was never any satisfaction or satiation of the body. And we were taught not to want to be satiated, actually. Don't be satiated. Actually keep yourself a little hungry so that you're always hungry for more, right? All of these kind of, when you take a step back, y'all, it actually is really ridiculous. But when you're caught up in the kind of mythos, right? When you're caught up in the construction that the society has shown to you, has fed to you, has done a great job of selling to you, then it's so easy to look at your body, the thing that got you here, as somehow the enemy when it's actually supposed to be your best friend. What happens if we stop seeing our bodies as our enemies and see it as our companion, right? See it as our real lover. Our bodies are our lovers. What happens if we love it? Virgo is earth, y'all. Virgo is feminine and earth. And Virgo is very sensual. There is a sensuality to Virgo. There is an embodiment to Virgo. Quite frankly, Virgos can be hoes, right? In different area codes. I mean, literally, but we have been fed this image of Virgo as the virgin. And I push back a lot on that construction of Virgo. If you've listened to the show for a while, I've talked about this before. I push back on that because the way in which we have constructed virgin, through space and time has been one through a patriarchal understanding of it. Now, I was watching some of these videos over on the TikTok, because a lot of astrologers are talking about this eclipse season and giving their different analysis of stuff. There's all kinds of drama usually on astrology TikTok, and one of them was this kind of this questioning about Virgo. And so there's been some astrologers, especially evolutionary astrologers, talking about Virgo not being the virgin, yes, but virgin being an independent person, usually an independent woman who owned their own sense of self, was able to own their bodies and work the marketplace. And then there's other kind of astrologers who take a more Hellenistic or ancient approach who say that that's ridiculous. It's not true. There's no actual evidence of that, except for maybe one thing. And my thing is this: how does it serve us to understand virgin in the idea of it being of complete service to other people, that it is this kind of puritanical essence in one way, shape, or form that only knows how to give up itself for others? Who does that serve to understand service and therefore virgin in that way? Because again, if we're talking about Hellenistic astrology and we're going into Greek and Roman, even Babylonian, those are heavily patriarchal societies. They were patriarchal societies that examined the cosmos through that patriarchal lens, but also through the lens of power. Because many times you were working for the monarchy or those who were in power. So of course an eclipse is going to be a negative thing. If your boss going to get his head chopped off, you might tell that motherfucker to stay inside for a little bit because the cosmos is saying for you, you might be eclipsed. But for somebody else, that eclipse opens up a whole different way of being, a whole new power structure. Because if that a power was eclipsed, they might be able to live, right? It's all contextual, it's all situational. And so when we're thinking about then this kind of present day moment, y'all, I really want us to ask ourselves, how are we individually and collectively sick, and what would it help? What do we need to do to make ourselves well? Right? What does wellness really look like when we are embodied in our body and believe our realities versus, again, thinking that if we put our mind over matter, it'll somehow get us something different? What has that gotten us to date collectively? And then what has that gotten you to date individually, if that is a mantra that you have lived by? How does your body feel? Right? How does your body really feel? And do you believe what your body's feeling? And can you not criticize the body? Can you just observe it? Can you allow it to truly be a companion, be a lover? Can you love your body as a way to love you? This is why I say Virgo is a lover. I know they say when Venus is in Virgo, it's, I think, in detriment. Okay, why though? Why would it be in detriment if we don't automatically reduce Virgo down? Ooh, if we don't automatically reverse Virgo down to being critical, to being the one that's always analytical and needing to organize things? What if we understand that that is how the body has been disciplined in these colonial projects? Because if you actually believed your body, why the fuck would you show up for work every damn day to be mistreated, to go home and still not be able to have your basic needs met? What sense does the economic system make if our bodies are turned on? If we believed our bodies, if we understood it as another logic and knowing system, then how viable and sustainable will these economic systems be? Because how much would people be buying into them versus tearing this shit down and trying to think of, imagine, and enacting something new? So the South Node in Virgo right now, y'all, is really asking us to release that knowing, to release the ways in which we have been taught, right? Again, knowledge. This is ruled by Mercury. We have been taught to understand our bodies, therefore understand our health. Does it work? So again, this is about reinterrogating disciplines, the disciplines that have taught us about our bodies and how they're supposed to work. So we're going through reevaluation as well of medicine, right? We're going through reevaluation of medicine right now, and as a way to understand health. And so I'm not going to be surprised if we continue to see massive transformations in the healthcare system, starting with a kind of another breaking. It's already been broken, right? We saw the cracks during the lockdowns and the height of the pandemic, but in its aftermath, right, we really have seen just how much we lack the ability to care for ourselves and one another, because again, that virus that infected the world showed us more about our humanity than anything else has for a very long time. And that virus showed us that you cannot outlive your goddamn body. You cannot outthink that body. I don't care how much you've disciplined it and you've controlled it, and you think that control and disciplining of your body so it's tight and it's muscled and it's rigid. How many people who are in quote unquote good health, once that virus snuck its way into that body, completely were put down, having to reevaluate even what care and discipline looked and meant? So right now we are being asked, for me, this great lockdown that people are talking about, of trying to lock in and, really engage with the last half of the year, to have set goals and really be committed to them, be disciplined and go after them. And people are saying yes, because that is that Saturn and Pisces energy. I don't disagree, but I would say this: is it about discipline or is it about devotion? Because what has disciplining the body the way we've been taught actually gotten us collectively, right? What has it gotten us collectively? What and has that made us collectively well or collectively more sick? Because if we don't care for our bodies, if we don't listen to our bodies, if we don't have empathy for our bodies, how can we have for other people, y'all? We can talk about mutual aid and community and we need one another, but we don't have empathy for one another because we don't have empathy for ourselves. And empathy is not diagnoses. What do I mean by that? There's a way, again, I also think with the South Node in Virgo, and this eclipse season happening, we're going to be reevaluating also how we diagnose the body, how we have compartmentalized the body and put it into these boxes that aren't allowing us to fully expand and live. So I think a lot about diagnoses that people love to do for themselves. Everyone wants to diagnose a narcissist and everybody else, but then people really cling on to things that they are told that they quote unquote have. So ADHD, autism, CPTSD, PTSD, all of these things, right? That these quote unquote ways to understand how we engage with the world have now become identities that we hold on to and markers that then confine us in our bodies to certain ways of being. I think that we're also having to reevaluate that. Right? We reevaluate the need to always search for an external understanding of who we are and truly come into an embodied experience. Okay. So that we can truly understand then what it is we need and want individually, so that we can then figure out what that looks like practically. And that's what allows us to have these collectives, these Piscean kind of deep waters of the collective unconscious. But if we're not conscious, if we're not embodied, if we're not in the mundane, that sacred is going to be a shaky ground, because whose sacred are you in then, right? Who is leading your head? Who's the authority that you are following, right? So Saturn going back into Pisces is also going to be reviewing the people we have placed our authority into, especially in spiritual communities. All right. This idea of who we look to lead us collectively, we has to be reevaluated, because if we're letting go of the ways in which we have been taught knowledge and who knowledge comes from and where we locate knowledge, to then really reevaluating that and coming back into the body and turning those kind of indigenous knowledges on, going into other ways of knowing, then the authority of knowledge, the archetype of knowledge that we have all been taught and fed these colonial projects, is also going through a reevaluation. So this is really about a straight white man, right? It's about straight white men as a ideology and an embodiment. Because many times, as we're talking about how we want to have these new futures, y'all, we're looking to the same old structures, archetypes, knowings to somehow bring us into a new future. That doesn't make any sense. So Saturn's saying, review this shit. Does any of this make sense? This whole idea of rise of AI technology, this is part of this conversation too. Because again, those outer planets are in a conversation, retrograding. So we're reviewing all the things we've been taught about these so-called promises and futures. Pluto Aquarius, Uranus Gemini, meeting up with Neptune in Aries before it moves back into Pisces, right? The apex point is Neptune, the storytelling, the belief systems, right? The authority that we give ourselves to. Everything in society is based upon stories and myths. So if we are being fed the myth of a new future that is nothing more than a regurgitation of the same past, of scams and false promises and all of these future technologies that never become present. Well, if we believe those patterns, right, and if we believe that we are being fed a tale as old as time, then why go back to the same beast? You know what I mean? Why go back to the same beast? We got to make a new beauty. And that really, to me, is another story that's being told on this full moon in Pisces. Okay, so this full moon in Pisces is unveiling a kind of second part of this eclipse season, or this eclipse story that started last year in September. So what was going on around last year in September around that full moon in Pisces that is now kind of getting a second stage, I should say. You can kind of say, right? A reevaluation, the next phase, the next act of that. All right. And I know for me, again, Pisces rules the fifth house. So Scorpio risings, fifth house, creativity, projects, children, and the like. I know that I am revisiting a couple of old projects, one being my book and the other one being the documentary that I'm working on called Queering Chaos. And it's funny enough, I had started this idea of the documentary last year around this time. It took me a minute to figure out what exactly I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And so as I've gotten clearer about that, I was able to figure out who I want to interview and get a general idea of what I wanted to convene. So now from October until February, literally the time of this retrograde, I will be hosting once a month at Dorothy Downstairs in Chicago, Queering Chaos Conversations, in which we're going to have different topics. The first one actually being on spirituality in October. October 21st, we're going to talk about what does it mean to queer spirit, right? And I'm bringing a couple of folks on who are queer and who work in different modalities of spirituality to come together and have a conversation so that we are moving conversations, right, collectively. So if you can house people together in one location, they bring their people, right? So now we're mixing and we're reimagining collectively, right, what could be possible by having the conversation start from a queer lens, not try to get to the queer lens. You see what I'm saying? So after that, we're going to be talking about things like love and relationships, going into family, talking about the dance floor as a space of imagination and education. And then the last one, probably something around futures and dreaming and AI and stuff and how we queer that. So that's an example for me, right, of this kind of second act. Last year was planting the seeds, telling myself and convincing myself, honestly, that I was an artist, like coming out of that headspace of academic and realizing that that was what I did, but I never was actually really a part of. That's why I didn't fit, right? There is a way that coming back into and really sitting in me seeing myself as an artist was also really healing for my child, my inner child, the inner child that my whole life when I was growing up, all I did was create. I would be drawing and making stories, writing stories, all kinds of shit, y'all. And then over time, I stopped, right? Because it wasn't serious enough. And I had to, be disciplined into a real discipline and all that, blah, blah, blah. We can all talk about that in some way, shape, or form. But really, right now, I'm realizing in order for me to make a living, in order for me to even have care of myself, I have to play. I have to be the artist once again. So it feels like I get a second chance at that, but doing it my way, combining all the methodologies I've been taught and the theories and concepts I had to learn with my knowing, right, and what I want to create and bring out into the public. So that's another example, right, that I want to just give as we're talking about this full moon and the story that's unfolding. What is the story unfolding for you? Don't see astrology, y'all, especially if you were learning it or listening to me about astrology. I really don't want you to see astrology as that's telling you what to do. This is who you are. So if you're a Aquarius sun, this is who you are. And if you got that with the Capricorn moon, that means you're damned to hell. No, it doesn't. It's just giving you it's telling you the energies that you walked into, right? And it's helping you realize that once you understand those energies, you have the ability to co-create the story with the universe. The universe is not trying to be your dominant mama and daddy. Why would it want to do that? That is too much responsibility. It is trying to help our asses understand what it means to be human. And part of being human, y'all, is taking responsibility for our life, for living in life, both of ourselves and one another. So I really do believe the cosmos is trying to show us what it means to be human once again, because we keep going in these goddamn loops through space and time of realizing that once we remove ourselves from our humanity, there is societal collapse. There's actual real consequences to us not taking seriously the responsibility of truly being living beings, right? And that responsibility is not a dominant one. That's a responsibility of relationship. So we are being taught what relationship is and how bad we are at relationships, again, to ourselves and therefore to one another. And the first relationship that we are really having to repair, not the first, one of the big ones we're having to repair right now, I should say, is the relationship to our body so that we can have a relationship to our health that will then create collectives that are healthy. Because again, we're sick. And part of the way we can do that is by retelling the story, retelling the mythos of where we even come from. So origin stories matter right now. We have the state again trying to double down its origin story, removing history, removing the story. So this is another thing, y'all. Please do not think that storytelling is somehow some passive, docile way of engagement, or that that's somehow inaction. I will always push back on that. That makes no sense. The only thing that is keeping that motherfucker in power right now is the story he has told that folks have bought into it. Right? He has weaved a tale as old as time, and we have bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. Right? Stories matter, y'all. If stories didn't matter, they wouldn't be spending all this time and resources to take stories down in our museums, right? To rewrite curriculum, to ban books even more, right? To have institutions of higher learning bend the knee because, quite frankly, it seems like they're broke, and so they're strong arming other institutions that themselves are asset holders to get money for themselves. This is classic bully mob mentality. You know what I'm saying? This is literally what Trump has done and always done in terms of his business. He's a businessman. He's not a politician. He's a businessman, y'all. But businessman is what makes the world go round, because that is the foundation of the Western modern nation state through the idea of capital. Right? So we got to rewrite that story. So stories really do matter. So when I'm saying I want you to take responsibility for your life by taking responsibility for your story, that's what I mean. It is really vitally important right now. It is the action that is needed. It is the kind of individual and collective movement required. But to tell new stories, y'all, to tell new stories, you got to believe your story. Do you believe your story? Do you believe what's happened to you? Again. And the one way you can do that is by believing your body. The body doesn't lie. The body doesn't lie. The body doesn't lie. The body don't lie, y'all. Them hips don't lie, neither does the body. Okay? And again, that's why the first thing I learned when I was doing forensic work, anthropology work, and doing skeletal analysis and working on forensics cases back in my 20s, looking at the body, like it's, you can see the pain, you can see the cracks, you can see the healing. This is also something that I appreciate about oral histories and, archaeological excavations that are done ethically and all the like, is that we see again in history that people will care for our sick, care for our injured, care for the elderly and children. This idea that human societies are built upon dominance and violence and man eat man and everyone for themselves does not show up in the actual record, y'all. It does not show up in their archaeological record at all. Some of the earliest graves that we have found in what we now call Europe and parts of Middle East and parts of Africa, right, have shown people who have been buried, who have healed, who have been tended to, fractures healed, old age. You can tell old age, and especially fusions of the spine and the lipping and stuff, right? They were put into graves in which they had adornments and there was ritual. You could see it in the care of how they laid their dead down. Do we care for our dead? Do we know how to lay our dead down? Do we know how to care for one another in life so that we care for one another in death? So we are going through a collective transformation, y'all. Again, Pluto and Aquarius retrograde. Uranus going to go retrograde in the 6th. Neptune retrograde right now. We have got to die. We have got to collectively die and really reassess not only the stories we are told, but the knowledge and the logic used to tell those stories. Does the logic make sense? And I keep saying this. Does Western knowledge production make sense? Does Western knowledge production make sense as the main logic, the only logic, the methodology that is quote unquote valid? Even though most of the time what they are quote unquote making valid are things indigenously many people already know. So who's trying to catch up with who? Right? But who do we put our faith and authority into? Right? What structures and systems and logics are we told somehow can get us freedom or somehow can get us to a progressive future, when in actuality we keep being fed the promise of a future that never makes itself present? But how do we even know that? How can we kind of catch ourselves if we're not present? So what else we have to do? Feel the feet. Pisces North Node is feet. Virgo is stomach, digestion. What are you digesting that needs to be released so that you can actually find your feet and figure out what your spirit and spirituality truly is? What are your belief systems, right? What do you believe in and why? Have you ever questioned that? So change is here, right? And I think this is really the energy of this eclipse season with the outer planets. They're both in a conversation. I don't want to separate them, but they're an overarching like kind of story that has been emerging for a while, preparing us for the next few years, y'all, in which it will be fire and air. There is no going back. And why would we want to? There is no going back. That's an illusion. That's what it is. The state has fallen. So now we're trying to figure out what is the new iteration. And as we're trying to figure out something new, right, things are going to continuously still fall. So there's a both and happening right now, right? There's a both and happening, which means can we hold the both and with ourselves? Does criticalness actually help us when the first critic we are taught to be critical of is ourselves? Again, what happens if we become our own lovers? What if we love our bodies? What if we replace the idea of discipline with this understanding of devotion, which means you have to then actually bring real care to the body? Because again, it's earth, it's the stomach, it's the feminine. Another way to think about it, y'all, is this. If we think about Mercury as the messenger planet, again, like all planets, two signs, dualistic, feminine, masculine. And we understand Gemini is the masculine side of Mercury and Virgo, the feminine side of Mercury. Why are we still privileging masculinity as somehow leading when we have seen again through space and time that when we allow masculinity to lead, it does not know how to sustain it? There's no sustainability in the masculine leading in everything, especially in thought. The feminine there has to be a balance, right? There has to be a balance. So the body, when we let the mind lead and the body is just kind of there, what happens? You get exhausted. Your mind is not meant to do all that thinking, all that processing, all that constant on the go. But that's what we're taught. Be dominant, be on top of it, mind over matter, masculine over feminine, right? What happens if we flip and reverse that? If we let the body lead and have the mind calm down, have the mind rest? Well, then the mind will actually have what it needs to process, to strategize, to understand, okay, and now I can understand what I'm feeling. So then what am I going to do? Now I got to go to the mind and figure some shit out, right? But the mind is in a conversation with the body because the body is that intuitive knowing. Right? There's more than one type of knowing, but we've only been fed one type of knowing as the correct one. So again, we're being asked to let that go. So what do you have to let go, y'all? Look at your Virgo house. What is that Virgo house saying has to be reevaluated in terms of what you've disciplined yourself into and how you can turn that into a devotional practice. So, example, let's use me again. 11th house Virgo, okay? I got 11th house in Virgo, and my Mercury is there on my MC as well, okay? So, I mean, like I said before, I meant to fucking yap. But yap, we're about what? Well, the 11th house is a collective in terms of organizations and groups and the kind of communities we're a part of. It's the house of fraternity, of freedom, of quote unquote brotherhood. It's the house of fellowship, right? It's also where our hopes and dreams lie because we have to dream collectively. Even the damn SARS says, even the houses say, dreaming is a collective endeavor, y'all, right? We have to dream collectively. So what am I learning about the South Node being there? Well, shit, I can't keep showing up in the public because it also rules the public and social media too. The 11th house and the 3rd house, you can look at social media in that way as well. I'm having to reevaluate how I show up in the public and social media, y'all, quite frankly, and what that means for me in terms of how I teach and the health and my own health, right? There's a way that I'm having to kind of reevaluate how I want to show up in the public. Do I always want to be seen as a professor? Because I'm not a professor, right? I was once a professor, but I'm not a professor. That's not my identity. That's one thing I did, right? But I'm naturally somebody that's curious. I'm naturally somebody that likes to kind of ask questions and engage, but I want to do so in ways that are much more playful. 5th house Pisces. But I had to find my play. I had to find my childlike nature again, right? But that took a lot of breaking, and I'm still breaking because it's so hard now when I am trying to do videos, short form videos for my socials, right? It's a lot harder to do. I don't really love them because I can see myself trying to figure out a different way to show up by being devoted, right, to what I am really committed to, which is a healthy collective, right? I want us to have healthy collectives, a healthy society. But the only way we're going to do that is if we actually allow ourselves to be children again and allow for the childlike nature of ourselves to be centered. So for me, this is about learning about how to care for children once again so we can care for ourselves and care for the collective. So that's one example, y'all, and there's plenty of others. So again, look at the story that's playing out in your chart based upon the house that is ruled by Virgo and Pisces, along with where those outer planets are as well. So that's going to be Aries, Gemini, and Aquarius, and start to construct that story. Get curious about it. It's not one definitive story, it's a story that's ongoing. So if you were to do that ongoing story, what would it look like and who are the characters in it? And again, y'all, if you're interested, I do teach this in my Patreon. I work with astrology as storytelling. So please join me there if you want to do more kind of one-on-one work in a group. So more, well, I guess, collective small group work along with a little bit more one-on-one work with me, excuse me. But if also you're interested in having your chart read this way, I have a number of different offerings on my website that you can book directly with me because I am a practicing astrologer and I love to do readings for clients. And I have different types of readings because of this, because I want us to help tell different types of stories. So I have, of course, my Journey to Self, which is my natal reading, which is much more in depth. It's a journey to the self. So how do we center the self? By understanding the self. But I also have readings that examine your spiritual gifts. So understanding your spiritual gifts with astrology, looking at your womb, so Chiron, graduation and life transitions. I've got a clarity reading. That's a new one. If you have a question that you feel you want guidance from the cosmos on, then you ask the question and then we dive into the chart and query it. I also do things with parents and children as well. Those are just different examples, right? But we can tell those different types of stories. And I'm really liking the parent one because there's a way that myself as a parent, right, I had to retell the story of what it means to be a mother. This is actually the Pisces story as well for me, y'all, this Pisces fifth house. I've talked about this before, but because of how I understood mothering and motherhood and how I had the different examples I had of it, both my own mom, who was a workaholic. My dad raised us. My dad was a stay-at-home dad. My mom was the one that worked. So in my house, gender was flipped. Gender roles were flipped. All the shit was flipped in my house. Fourth house, Aquarius, South Node. Okay. And literally, my mom was in the hospital. She's a trauma burn ICU nurse. So she was always away. Funny enough, my Venus is in the 12th house in Libra with Pluto, and my moon is in the 7th house in Taurus. And there's a couple of conversations happening that bring those two together. And so it makes sense. My mother was always not there. She was the main one in the house that earned the money, and she was working in a hospital. So astrology can get real literal, y'all, in different kinds of ways. But anywho, one thing I had to really teach myself this last year, especially because I've got an 11-year-old, about to be 11-year-old, their birthday is September 9th. So happy birthday, Xander. Early birthday, baby. But something I had to really reevaluate is my understanding of being a mom, right? My child is a Aquarius rising, Pisces moon, Virgo sun. So my kid is literally in this axis. And one of the ways that I've really had to understand care and health and community is by becoming a mom and realizing that I didn't have any of that in the communities before, right? I was left to my goddamn own devices, even though I was supposed to be in this community of folks who said that, we're doing this thing called life together. But really we were showing up for kind of parties and social gatherings, but the everyday was still these kind of individualistic understandings of family that are exhausting. The modern family structure, y'all, the nuclear family is fucking exhausting. We are not meant to only raise our kids by ourselves, and kids need more than just the parent or parents to be the ones to raise them, right? Truly, it does take a village. And so when I went through the divorce and stuff and really had to reevaluate what it meant for me to be a mom to my child, my genderqueer child, right, in the present day, I had to throw all them goddamn scripts out and reevaluate and retell the story from the ground up based upon my knowing, based upon my interactions with with my child, but based upon me talking with my kid, right? And having to ask myself, okay, what is it that I would have actually needed as a child to be mothered, right? To be parented, to be cared for. And if I allow myself that curiosity, then it gave me more permission to be more open to the kind of mothering I wanted to do for my little one. Okay. So that's another example of this Pisces North Node and the changes in eclipsing, right? And that's what led me to moving, right? Moving in with roommates who actually could care about my child, not taking care of my child, but care for my child so that if I'm not here, I know that they are cared for, right? I've got other friends who they bring my kid in because I wanted my kid to be able to be in community with my people because that's who also is my family. So then I had to remake family. Aquarius, fourth house, Pluto's there, right? So all of these things are in a conversation that is allowing me to rewrite the story of family, right? Family and roots, community and care, and who I share my resources with, and how that then translates into the work I do. Rewrite your story, y'all. The shit's not easy, but it's needed. It's necessary, and it's a responsibility we have to be human. We got to own our own heads. And again, this to me is really the lesson of Saturn as she has gone through the deep waters of Pisces and come up to the Aries and come through into her Cronus again. She's saying, yeah, baby, you got to take responsibility. It's not about being harsh or a taskmaster. It's about there's a cost to living, right? And now we have literally put a cost on living. So if we put a cost on living, there is truly a cost to living. Is that cost worth it? And if not, then it's time to rewrite that goddamn formula, rewrite that script. Okay, so play with that, y'all. Let me know in the comments, honestly, what unfolds for you during this eclipse season, right? Starting off with this lunar eclipse, lunar eclipse in Pisces. And then we're going to be continuing this conversation because we're going to get a new moon in Virgo at the, on September 21st, the second new moon. So if you want to hear about that first new moon in Virgo, go to last week's episode in which I kind of, which I broke that down as well. So we're in this continuous conversation, right, about health, wellness, the collective, and the self. All right. Now, for those on the Patreon, let's get into a breakdown of the actual individual days. Okay. So let's go to the weekly forecast. Okay, let me stop there because I've been a yapping as normal. So let me know if this makes sense, y'all. This episode took me forever to do. I must have went through, I'm not even joking, 25 takes. I couldn't figure out how to get into it. My mind, no matter how many notes I took, I couldn't make it work until I finally said, fuck it, let me just really just talk and see where this takes me. So let me know how this goes, y'all. I'm still experimenting and playing, but I am committed, right? I am devoting myself to showing up every week for this show. And it has also been very healing. It's been healing my relationship to my own sense of work, my relationship to, quite frankly, the public, and how I want to exchange with the public, right? So that's why I did the focusing more on the Patreon and really highlighting that, because that allows for the exchange to happen. So if you want to exchange with me, please consider joining the Patreon. Tier start as low as $5 a month. And that gives you access to the full episodes of Yapping with the Stars, along with a few other things that I have on there. And at higher tiers, there is access to more content, more information, but also just more ways for us to engage as community, as I work a lot with both with music, with media, and with books to kind of help us learn how to retell our stories outside the colonial project. Okay. Next week, we get a Mercury Cazimi. So Mercury and the Sun meet in Virgo, and Virgo is going to be loud. It's going to be loud. It's going to be loud, y'all. So we're going to continue this story by delving into our sense of self and our communication and how that expresses in the body. All right. So as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscape so we can bring the realities that we want to bring into the present. Till next time. I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. Like Michelle sang. The tides in the sky, where we come from. The light that lit the way for our ancestors in the dark of night. when they had to leave the spaces that tried to steal their breath and life. Reworking, while also learning how to work with the land that was also being worked. A land and people under duress. The trees did not ask if they wanted to participate in such brutal practices. Yet here they were. Here we are. All beholden to a power structure that only knows how to take and never to give, while telling us this is the right way to live. So I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. As Michelle say, the cosmos. Imagine that freedom lied in parable of the sower that sowed the seeds of earth's seed that wanted to bring humans back to the stars, to start again, to start anew. Remember where we come from and who we are. The stars that lit the way, that guide the light. The moon that holds the tides of the waters, our connection to earth and land. As above, so below, yet we don't know, because we have lost the above and the below. So I don't want to be right, I just want to be free, and journey to the cosmos.